Thank you very much for having me. My name is Elizabeth Weber. I am a professional English language instructor and academic expert for didactics. Especially in coaching sessions with university lecturers, the number one problem that popped up most of the times is that these instructors say they feel that they are less competent and they feel more insecure when teaching content in English. Now, these negative feelings, this insecurity, most often stems from a misconception. And this misconception says that a language belongs to its native speakers, that these native speakers are the true owners of the language. And since you are not one of these native speakers and it is not your language, it feels foreign in some way. Also, you compare how you feel when teaching in your first language to how you teach in English, and then it might seem that in English, everything is more challenging. It's more challenging to find the right words and phrases and that sort of things. Now, as true as this might be for other languages, that there are native speakers who more or less own the language, such as, say, Danish. Danish belongs to the Danish. This is not the case for English anymore. And the reason why English is different is because it is used as an international means of communication. So this brings us back to the beginning, something that we know anyway, but it's important to keep this in mind and think about this again and again. So in this speech, I would like to plant a seed in you, and that is the seed of understanding English as a tool. It is a tool that helps you and allows you to communicate with your students, to share your content with others, with your students from all over the world, basically. You use English not for the sake of it or because you want to belong to a certain culture. You use it because it allows you to talk about your subject, to talk about your content with people who you could not share your knowledge with otherwise, right? And this means that you do not need to compare yourself to any other sort of speaker. You also do not need to compare yourself when using English to yourself when using German or any other first language. You do different things with these different languages and different situations. These languages serve different purposes for you and also for your students. Now, when you use English in the classroom to teach content, it is a tool for you and also for your students. And you need to make sure that the language does basically two major things in the classroom. First, it has to help you bring across the content. And second, it has to help your students in their individual learning processes. So taking the information that you try to pass on to them, taking that in, making it their own. And in order to do so, you do not need to have the fanciest vocabulary or phrases at hand. It actually does not help if you know and use all the words of the English language. If your students cannot follow, if they cannot understand, and if they cannot learn from you, right? So instead, try to understand yourself as a successful example of a multilingual, a person who has mastered not just one language, but several languages successfully. And let this understanding empower you and guide you when you use English as a medium of instruction. Now you might say, what does this mean? Well, it means that you become aware of what you actually can do in the foreign language. You can successfully communicate very complex topics in a foreign language, topics that most people cannot even communicate in their first language. Also, you can not only communicate such content, but you can also help other people make sense of this new information. Help your students learn the content thanks to English as a lingua franca and medium of instruction. And here it is important to understand that English is not only there for you and you use it as a tool. It's the same situation for your students. It's a tool for them just as well. But in addition, for your students, English first and foremost is one thing: foreign. Now, when we use English as a medium of instruction, we of course focus on the content and bringing this content across to our students. But that doesn't mean that we can stop there. We have to make sure that we also help our students take the content in and do so in a foreign language. Now, doing so is actually very hard work for your students' brains, right? It's double the amount of work that they have to do because they need to master two things at the very same time. They have to make sense of the new content and they have to make sense of a foreign language and put the two things together in their brain. This is also the reason why your students feel very exhausted after they had sessions in English, by the way, right? And it's also the reason why you might feel exhausted because your brain has to do the same thing. You have to bring across content in a foreign language to your students, and you have to choose the way that you articulate very wisely. Now, for us as instructors, this means that we need to help and support our students. Now, the cool thing is that we can rely on our own experience here. We already know what it feels like to learn and use a foreign language successfully. And we can use this knowledge and these elements to now support our students in their learning processes. For our courses in English, this means that we must adapt the language to the needs of our students, right? So instead of sounding fancy, the language needs to be appropriated to the needs of our students so that it helps them reduce the level of foreignness for them. Now, how is this done? Well, I have two suggestions that I would like to share with you. First one, be very careful about how you deliver the content. So, for example, the words that you choose to explain something. Try hard and practice to use language that is easily accessible and that can be understood easily. This doesn't mean baby talk, but it means that you talk in a way that people can actually follow, right? That this is priority for you. And this again also brings us back to feeling bad about you might like fancy vocabulary and phrases and that sort of things. You most likely don't like any of that. It's all there. You have what you need to make yourself understood. And my suggestion really is that you try to explain things in rather simple terminology, in simple words, talking around vocabulary, so to speak. Because as I said, it doesn't help if you have the fanciest vocabulary, but unfortunately, your students don't understand these words, right? And by explaining things, you help your own brain make sense of what you wish to cover, and especially you help your students process the information that you wish them to learn and take in, right? And the second thing is repetition. Now, repetition is key. We know from didactics that repetition is a crucial element for learning, right? And it is particularly important when learning in difficult situations. And for our students, that one of those difficult situations is learning in a foreign language. So make sure that key information, key elements that you wish to pass on to your students are actually repeated and repeated again. Now, this does not mean that you should say the same stuff over and over like a parrot. What I mean by that is that you try to create learning situations where students have to get active themselves, because learning is an active process, and that they make use of the information presented, of the language presented, and then use their own vocabulary, their own language, their own wording to work with the content. This will help your students process the input and also process the language at the same time. And the second wonderful thing that this does, it helps you, it gives you and your students an excellent opportunity for rapport, for truly finding out if they understand and if they follow what you try to teach. And this already brings me to the end of my part. I hope that what I've said helps you reflect on how you feel when you use English, and how you can work with the language to teach your content most effectively. And I also hope that eventually you feel empowered as a competent multilingual. For now, thank you very much for listening. And maybe we can also start a discussion later on. But now, enough from my side, and over to Paul. Thank you very much. I think that is a super important topic. Actually, I think this relationship that we need to establish with our students is one of the key elements and one of the elements that is mostly overlooked right? We think about content, and I now talk as a teacher trainer, basically. Yeah, we talk about content and how do I deliver that, and what different sorts of methods do I use. And I've been teaching for 20 years now. And if there's one thing that I have really learned in those 20 years that I totally underestimated when I started out, is how crucial it is to have this connection with your students. And this is really, I would say today, it's probably one of the most important aspects, that you have this connection, that you feel your students and that they also can feel you, and sense that you want to work on something together, you want to achieve goals together. So I think that you pointed this out already shows that obviously you too feel that there is importance in this aspect, which is wonderful. Now, I think your question was if I have tips on how you can do this. I think it's very important to start out right at the beginning. So when you start a new semester, this is the perfect time to also help shape this community. And community not only between your students, but also this like cooperation with your students, that it's like it's not them and me, but that it's us. And I want us to understand as each other as a team, working together in a team, and not team as in the Austrian way of understanding team, where team stands for toll, ein anderer macht's, great, somebody else does the job. But team more in this Anglo-American way of like, together everyone achieves more, which I have to say is not necessarily the case either. Yeah, just because you work together doesn't mean you're going to be more successful, but you get the idea. So it's really like we're in this together. We're working on this together. It's not I try to prevent you from something. I try to show you what you cannot do. And instead saying like, I'm here for you. My job as an instructor is to help you learn. This is, as a teacher, this is my reason for being there, right? And I can only do so if we can work together. And here is what Paul already said about feedback and how important it is to use feedback. And feedback not so much in the sense of like, this is good and this is bad, but feedback really in that sense that we need rapport. We need to listen to each other and see how the other person feels. And this is important for us as instructors. So one way of doing this is, of course, asking questions, but also making sure that you get responses to your questions. I think we all know, especially now with webinars and all that, we know that you can ask a million questions. If nobody responds, all you have is dead silence until you kind of like resignate and like, okay, well then I answer my own question. And what happens when you do this is you grow students that know, if I just don't say anything long enough, I will get the perfect response offered on a plate. So I think it's important to, right from the beginning onwards, create an environment where there are clear rules, where you agree on rules of this is how we go about here in this course. And this is how we work together. We are a team, and teams need clear rules. And one of them, for example, that I established right at the beginning is, guys, when I ask you a question, I would like you to respond. And the reason for this is that I need to hear back from you. I can only help you. I can only be there for you if I know what you need. And we will only find out by talking to each other. And especially in webinars, this is even more important, because in in-person sessions where we saw each other in a lecture room or so, we did a lot of reading our students. And we never even realized how much we read our students. We read their face and we read their body language, and we interpret a lot from this information that we get. And now via Zoom, especially when people turn off their screens, but even when they're turned on and I look at you directly, it means I have to look at my camera. So I just see that there are little windows and I see there are people, but I cannot read your facial expressions any longer. And I'm missing very important information that I would otherwise have, right? So this is why it's so important to really make clear, especially in webinars, hey guys, we really need to talk to each other. When you ask me a question, I don't turn off my screen and pretend I'm not there. I will try and answer, and I want exactly the same from you. And this would be, I think, a very crucial stage at the beginning, where you set up a certain amount of rules and say like when I ask you something, I need you to respond. And by the way, if this doesn't happen, if you ask questions and nothing comes back, that you really remind people of this and say like, guys, this is what we agreed on. And I cannot work with you if you don't communicate with me. I think that would be very important. And during the course, and then I'm already silent again. I'm a teacher, I like to speak, sorry. So during the semester, I think it's important to give people opportunities to get active and to, because through their action, we as instructors, we can see what's going on. So it's not only asking questions, it's creating situations where people can get active and you watch them while they do so. And from that, you then, you start working together. And this gives a feeling of, we're in this together, we're doing this as a team, I'm here to help and support you, and I want you to be successful. People need to build up the answer. It's not just the answer that has to build up, they have to make sense of the content, right? For us, when we ask a question, we know the content and we know what we want to hear. And this is why for us, it seems like we ask a question, it seems like forever until somebody responds. And the reason is that in our head, we know all the answers when we ask a question, even before that. But of course, for a student, the situation is completely different. When a student gets a question, first it's like, oh, that's a question, I should do something. Content, what did you just say? Okay, how does this make sense? How does this correspond with what she actually wants me to say? Is it really clear? Just give me a second. Okay. And then trying, because they feel the same insecurities that teachers feel too in a foreign language, is like, okay, how do I put this in appropriate wording? And then overcoming your fear and speaking up in front of other people. And that takes a very long time, much longer than you would ever expect, much longer than we are willing to wait normally. So my suggestion would be not to constantly just have questions and wait for answers, but instead have a step in between. So tell people, like, I give you a minute or two, take a moment. That would be probably even better than minute. Take a moment and reflect what we've just covered in the last 10 minutes. And then I would like you to see if you can come up with the following question, or see if you can give me the 3 most important aspects that we've covered in the last 10 minutes. So take a moment, go through what we've just talked about, and take down what you would consider the 3 most essential parts. Take it down in writing. You give people some time to do so, and they also need to verbalize this in writing. And this gives people something to hold on to, because once this is done, the step, you can then ask, okay, what did you take down? And either you use the chat, people can write stuff, and then you pick up information from there. You can also do this with larger groups, or if you have smaller groups where you can actually then start a conversation as well, you can then just say, okay, now you took something down. What is it that you took down? And people find it easier to read something from their notes than having to create those sentences in a foreign language plus foreign content. Yeah, because it is the content that is new for them as well. It's not just the language and the content, of course, that they also have to struggle with, right, to make sense of. And that is very demanding of a brain. And that's why everybody involved in teaching in English and learning in English is super exhausted afterwards, because it's just double the strain on your brain. And then just saying, if you do this online, the attention span is reduced dramatically. So we know that the attention span of an educated adult in regular instruction, so when you see each other face to face, then this is about 20 minutes, which is not a lot of time, right? If you think about it. And if you think that our regular instruction is 90 minutes of talking, that does not go together. Now, it's 20 minutes if you're in the classroom together in your first language. Make this online, a webinar, attention span is reduced by 50% simply because it's offered online. Yeah. And then if it's in a foreign language, it's another 50% off. And then we're down to 5 minutes where people can actually focus on something. And then you should change. And that, of course, is really short. Right? And that's why we need different methods. We need activation. We need getting people active so that their brain can switch between different tasks and their attention span can be held longer. Just imagine what happens in your brain, right? If you force your brain to think in German and then like, okay, give me this in English, but you think in German, but give it to me in English. That, of course, is super stressful for your brain, right? And it's actually something that needs super, super much training. That's what interpreters do. And they study for years to do nothing but help their brain switch between languages real quick. And they need years for this, years of practice. And even then they can only stay focused for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then they have to take a pause as professional interpreters and have somebody else do the job because it is so stressful on the brain. So no wonder you find this super exhausting and feel like, actually, this does not work for me. That's totally normal. You would have some weird brain if this was not the case, right? That's exactly it. You don't necessarily need to have like fixed phrases like, I need this phrase when I want to say this or that. Instead, I'm a great fan of freedom. Your English is really good. You can communicate what you want to communicate. We all understand what you say. Everything that you need is already there. You are a competent user of English, no problem. And don't worry about pronunciation. If you sound like this, or if you sound in any other way when you speak, the important thing is, as I said, it is a tool. Okay, the language is a tool. When people can understand you, no matter how you sound, they need to be able to understand you. When you sound in such a way that people can no longer get you, then of course it doesn't work. But communication means people can understand you. And when they can do this, your communication is successful. Try to use different words to say the same thing. If people understand you, voila, you're successful. Just imagine how frustrating it must be for students when they enter university and they are taught in English. And we as instructors often assume, well, they know English, right? Because they had it at school. They should be competent users of English. And they themselves also view themselves as like, yeah, sure, I am more or less competent. I did my Matura. I obviously know English in one way or another. And then they come to university, they start listening to lectures held in English and they start reading articles in academic English, and suddenly they realize that, well, I understand that this is English, but I don't understand what it says. And that is highly, highly frustrating for students. I created a course exactly for that sort of students, that they saw that there are so many students that are highly frustrated because they feel totally lost and incompetent when it comes to using English. And that's what I see so much, that people, also students, they're super competent, they're good users of English, and they feel super small. And all you hear is like, my English is horrible and I don't want to even speak up in that sort of things. And that's why I created a course, which is basically an introduction to academic agricultural English, in my case, because it's Boku. And it's like the step, like, what is it? What makes this sort of English so different from the kind of English that you use in everyday life, that you see on television, that you know from school, right? And it's just, it's very different in its vocabulary. The good thing is that grammar basically stays the same, but vocabulary is very different. And vocabulary is nasty to learn, right? Because it needs a lot of repetition, unfortunately, right? But the good thing is you can practice this. And it's the same things, the same mechanisms that work for our students is also what works for us. The more we work in this environment, the more we get used to the vocabulary, the easier it also is for us and for our students to then work with this terminology and grow into this field of academia. And that's why it's so important to give them chances to use the language as much as they possibly can in your courses, because it will make not only the content learning better, but also processing the language and working with the language and actually communicating what they want to communicate. Because everything else is super frustrating. If you think about it from your own experience, you want to say something and you feel you can't. That is highly frustrating. And what it leads to is that you shut up, because it's like, well, and then you shut down your brain as well, because why should you think along if you cannot express yourself in the end? And that's not what we want, right? I think that is what is so important for us. We need to tell our students why the things that we want them to do, why this is relevant for them, why it's important to them. And it's not always self-evident. It's not always clear to our students. It might be clear to us, because it's like walking up a mountaintop. We know the mountaintop. We know what's waiting up there. We know what's on the way, on the road up there, but our students don't. For them, it's like they don't even see the summit. They just see, that the path bends somewhere, and that's all they see, and they have to trust us. And if they don't know you very well, it's difficult, right? Because they have many other things that they need to do and want to do, and then here you are with yet another task. So I think it's crucial to make it really clear and tell people that you can trust me. I only demand stuff from you that is really relevant, and I do so because I want the best from you. Okay, I want you to be successful, and if you walk the way with me, you're gonna be successful, but you need to do the things that I tell you to do. That's my job. That's why I'm here for you, right? And really driving home the message, why is that important? Why is it relevant for you to do this task? And if they see this, if they understand it, they will do it. Most. I mean, you always have the one or two that just don't do anything. They just sit in your class because it's warmer than outside, right? And you wonder why they are here. Obviously, because there's nothing on Netflix or something like this. But normally your regular student will do the things that you ask them to do if they know why. And if they don't see the reason behind it, if they don't know why, they won't do it, just as we wouldn't do it either. Yeah, I guess we need to drive home the message that we're in the same boat. I mean, just as I said, we don't work against each other. We work together, and it's a difficult situation. Zoom meetings are nasty for you, and they're nasty for me, and we have way too many. We can agree on this, but this doesn't mean that we can change the situation. So for a while it is the way it is, let's help each other, let's support each other so that it works for all of us. And then, for example, that's where my stuff comes in, like, and that's why I need you to respond to my questions. If I ask you something, I need to hear back from you, please, because that makes my life easier, and in the end it makes your life easier if I can help you. Let's help and support each other, not make it even harder than it already is. And people can't understand that. I mean, that's not something where you're like, huh, why? I don't want this. It's like, you have your, as I said, you have one or two students where if you're like, why the heck are you actually here? But with everybody else, I mean, normally people, they want to be in groups, they want to be cooperative, they don't want to work against you, they want to work with you, if they understand why.